The folding chair creaked under Dad's weight as he shifted uncomfortably in the blazing June heat. Riverside Community College's outdoor graduation ceremony wasn't exactly the venue he'd imagined when he first started saving for his daughter's education 28 years ago. "Finally, something useful from you," he muttered under his breath, adjusting his tie as another row of graduates filed past the stage. "Maybe now you'll get a decent job." I pretended not to hear him, focusing instead on the familiar weight of my cap and gown. Around me, my fellow graduates chatted excitedly about job prospects, graduate school applications, and finally moving out of their parents' basements. At 28, I was older than most of them by nearly a decade, which only reinforced Dad's narrative about my wasted years. Mom reached over and squeezed my hand. "We're so proud of you, honey. Business administration with honors. That's wonderful." "Associate's degree," Dad corrected quietly. "Let's not get carried away." My sister Lauren rolled her eyes from the seat beside him. "Can you just be supportive for once? This is supposed to be a celebration." "I am being supportive," Dad replied, his voice carrying that edge it always got when he felt criticized. "I'm here, aren't I? Taking time off work to watch her finally finish something she started." Finally finish something. The phrase stung because it wasn't entirely unfair. From Dad's perspective, my track record looked pretty dismal. High school dropout at 16. GED at 18. 2 failed attempts at traditional college. A string of minimum wage jobs that never lasted more than a year. Moving back home at 25 after what he called my failed restaurant phase. What Dad didn't know, what none of them knew, was that every apparent failure had been a carefully calculated step toward something much larger. The restaurant hadn't failed. I'd sold it. For $12 million. But we'll get to that. "Alexandra Morrison," the dean announced over the crackling sound system. I walked across the stage to polite applause, shook hands with administrators I'd barely interacted with during my 2 years here, and accepted my diploma with what I hoped looked like appropriate gratitude. This piece of paper represented the final credential I needed for the next phase of my plan. As I returned to my seat, my phone vibrated. Harvard calling. Right on schedule. I'd been expecting this call for 3 weeks, ever since my legal team had finalized the donation paperwork. The timing was perfect, better than I'd hoped for actually. Getting the call during my graduation ceremony felt almost poetic. "Aren't you going to answer that?" Mom asked, noticing my phone's display. "It can wait," I said, letting it go to voicemail. Dad leaned forward in his chair. "Probably a telemarketer. Or maybe one of those collection agencies." "Richard," Mom said sharply. "Today is about celebrating Alex's accomplishment." I know. I'm just saying she should be focused on finding real employment now. Not getting distracted by whatever get-rich-quick scheme she's cooking up next." My phone buzzed again. "Harvard. Someone really wants to reach you," Lauren observed. This time I answered. "Alexandra Morrison speaking." "Ms. Morrison, this is Dean Catherine Walsh from Harvard University. I hope I'm not catching you at a bad time." "Not at all," I said, aware that my family was listening to every word. "What can I do for you?" "We've just received final approval from our Board of Trustees regarding your proposed donation to the Morrison Center for Educational Innovation. I wanted to personally thank you for your extraordinary generosity and discuss the next steps." I could feel Dad's eyes on me. The Morrison Center. My family's name was Morrison, but that was purely coincidental. The center was being named after my maternal grandmother, Sarah Morrison, who'd been a teacher for 40 years before Alzheimer's took her memories. Dad didn't know that connection yet. "I'm glad to hear the approval came through," I said calmly. $500 million is the largest single donation in Harvard's history, Dean Walsh continued, her excitement evident even through the phone's speaker. "The impact on educational technology research will be transformative." The folding chairs around me had gone completely silent. Dad's face had turned an interesting shade of pale, while Mom looked like she'd misheard something important. "That's wonderful to hear," I said. "I'm particularly excited about the AI-powered learning platforms we discussed." "As are we. Your background in educational technology makes this partnership especially meaningful. Speaking of which, I wanted to confirm the press conference details for Monday's announcement." "Press conference?" Dad's voice cracked slightly. I held up a finger indicating I needed to finish the call. Monday at 10 a.m. works perfectly, I told Dean Walsh. Will President Morrison be available for the announcement? She'll be there personally. This donation will allow us to revolutionize how students learn across all disciplines. The Morrison Center will become a beacon for educational innovation worldwide. After I ended the call, the silence stretched uncomfortably long. Other families around us were chatting about dinner plans and photo opportunities, but my family sat frozen in their folding chairs, processing what they'd just heard. Did she say $500 million? Mom asked quietly. Yes. You donated $500 million to Harvard? Yes. Dad's voice came out as barely a whisper. Where did you get $500 million? I earned it. How? The same way anyone earns money, Dad. I built something valuable and sold it. But you work at the coffee shop. You live in our basement. You drive that 15-year-old Toyota. I own the coffee shop, I corrected gently. Along with 47 other locations across 3 states. I live in your basement because I like spending time with family, and I drive the Toyota because it's reliable. Lauren was staring at me like I'd grown a second head. You own Supreme Bean Coffee? Among other things, yes. But that's... She pulled out her phone, presumably to Google the company's valuation. That's a $100 million chain. $147 million as of our last quarterly report. But that's just one of my holdings. The graduation ceremony continued around us, but my family existed in a bubble of shocked silence. I could see the mental calculations happening behind Dad's eyes, trying to reconcile the daughter he thought he knew with the information he'd just received. I don't understand, he said finally. You dropped out of high school. You've never held a job for more than a year. You've been living in our basement for 3 years. I dropped out of high school to start my first business. I've never held a traditional job for more than a year because I've been building companies. And I've been living in your basement while quietly acquiring a portfolio of educational and technology businesses worth approximately $2.8 billion. Mom made a small sound that might have been a gasp or a laugh. $2.8 billion? Dad repeated. As of this morning's valuations, yes. Dollars. Stat. Dollars. The family sitting behind us had clearly been eavesdropping because I heard someone whisper, "Did she just say billion?" Lauren was scrolling frantically through her phone. Supreme Bean Coffee. Founded 8 years ago by Alexander Morrison. Privately held, estimated valuation $147 million. She looked up at me. This is you. That was my first major success, yes. Your first. Dad's voice cracked again. I've started or acquired 11 companies since then. Educational technology, online learning platforms, tutoring services, textbook publishing, student housing developments. Basically anything that helps people learn more effectively. Why? Mom asked, and it was the first question that actually mattered. Because education changed my life and I want to change how education works for everyone else. My phone rang again. This time the caller ID showed Dean Patricia Hughes from Stanford University. I should probably take this, I said. Ms. Morrison, this is Dean Hughes from Stanford. I hope I'm not interrupting your graduation ceremony. Not at all. Congratulations on the board's approval. Thank you. The $300 million donation to the Hughes Center for Learning Analytics represents a quantum leap forward for educational research. We're honored to partner with you. I could see Dad doing math in his head. $500 million to Harvard, $300 million to Stanford. $800 million in donations, and I'd been calling it pocket change. I'm looking forward to seeing the research initiatives take shape, I told Dean Hughes. The potential for personalized learning algorithms is extraordinary. Agreed. And I wanted to confirm that you'll be available for the joint announcement with Harvard on Monday? Having both institutions announce their partnership simultaneously will create tremendous momentum for educational innovation. I'll be there. After ending the second call, my family sat in complete silence. Around us, the graduation ceremony continued, but we might as well have been on another planet. $800 million, Dad said slowly. In donations, yes. That represents approximately 28% of my liquid assets. Liquid assets? Cash and easily convertible investments. The majority of my wealth is tied up in business equity and real estate. Lauren was typing furiously on her phone. There's an article here about mysterious donations to major universities. Anonymous benefactor pledges largest gifts in higher education history. Not anonymous, I corrected. Private. There's a difference. The article says the donor owns controlling interests in multiple educational companies and real estate developments near college campuses. That's accurate. It says you own 3 universities outright. Also accurate. Mom's voice was barely audible. You own universities? Riverside College, Valley Technical Institute and Morrison Online University. I acquired them over the past 4 years to test educational innovations at scale. Morrison Online University? Dad's engineering mind was clearly struggling to process the implications. You named a university after our family? After Grandma Sarah, actually. She always said education was the only thing nobody could take away from you. The ceremony reached its conclusion with the traditional cap toss. Hundreds of graduates threw their caps into the air while families cheered and took photos. My cap landed somewhere in the crowd, but I wasn't paying attention. I was watching my father's face as understanding slowly dawned. The restaurant, he said suddenly. The one that failed 3 years ago. Sold for $12 million to a national chain. I used the proceeds as seed money for the coffee shop acquisition. The minimum wage jobs that never lasted. Market research. I worked in retail, food service, manufacturing, and logistics to understand how different industries approach employee training and development. Living in our basement allowed me to minimize personal expenses while maximizing business investment. Also, I like spending time with family. But we thought. He trailed off, unable to finish the sentence. You thought I was a failure. And from your perspective, that was a reasonable assumption. Lauren was still reading from her phone. It says here that Morrison Online University has over 50,000 students and generates $200 million in annual revenue. 53,000 students as of last week, I corrected. And we're focused on making high-quality education affordable and accessible. Revenue is important, but impact matters more. Mom was crying. Not sad crying, but the kind of overwhelming emotional release that happens when your understanding of reality gets completely reorganized. I'm so sorry, honey, she said through tears. We didn't know. We didn't understand. You weren't supposed to know. I needed to build these companies without family pressure or external expectations. But we were so worried about you. So disappointed. I know. And I'm sorry for that. But I needed the freedom to fail without disappointing anyone. Building businesses is risky and most attempts don't succeed. If you'd known what I was trying to do, every setback would have become a family crisis. Dad stood up abruptly, walking toward the parking lot. After a moment of hesitation, I followed him. I found him leaning against his car, staring at the community college campus where I'd just graduated with an associate's degree in business administration. $2.8 billion, he said without looking at me. Yes. And you've been living in our basement, letting us think you couldn't get your life together. Dad, I have gotten my life together. Just not in the way you expected. But why the secrecy? Why let us worry? Why not share your success? Because success changes relationships. Once people know you have money, every interaction becomes different. Every conversation includes an underlying awareness of wealth. I wanted to maintain authentic family relationships as long as possible. Authentic? You've been lying to us for years. I've never lied about anything. I've just been selective about what information I've shared. He turned to face me for the first time. What's the difference? When you asked how work was going, I always told you it was fine. It was fine. When you asked if I needed help with rent, I always said I was managing. I was managing. When you worried about my future, I always said I had plans. I did have plans. But you let us think those plans weren't working.
I let you think what you thought. Your assumptions were based on limited information, but they weren't unreasonable assumptions. We stood in silence for several minutes, watching families load graduation decorations into their cars. I'm proud of you, he said finally. I know. And I'm ashamed of myself. Why? Because I should have been proud of you all along. Not because of the money, but because of who you are. The determination, the vision, the willingness to pursue your goals despite everyone else's doubts. Dad, you were being a good father. You saw your daughter making choices that looked risky and unsuccessful, and you worried about her future. That's what parents are supposed to do. But I was wrong. You were working with incomplete information. There's a difference. My phone rang again. This time it was my assistant. Alex, I have Dean Martinez from MIT on the other line. She says it's urgent regarding the announcement. Put her through. Ms. Morrison, we've just received approval for the $400 million donation to the Martinez Institute for Educational Technology. The board is thrilled about the partnership. $400 million to MIT. That brought the total announced donations to $1.2 billion. Dad was staring at me with an expression I'd never seen before. Not disappointment or worry or frustrated love. Something closer to awe. How many universities are you donating to? He asked after I ended the call. 17 in the first phase. Total pledges of approximately $2 billion over the next 5 years. $2 billion in donations? Education is the most important investment a society can make. These donations will fund research into personalized learning, AI-powered tutoring systems, virtual reality classrooms, and accessibility technologies for students with disabilities. And you've been planning this for years. I've been building toward this for years. The businesses, the acquisitions, the research, everything has been focused on revolutionizing how people learn. Why education? Because it's the great equalizer. A kid from a poor family can learn the same calculus as a kid from a rich family if they have access to the right resources. Technology can democratize access to world-class education in ways that were impossible a generation ago. Dad was quiet for a long time. Your grandmother would have been proud. I hope so. She always said you were special. Even when you were dropping out of high school and driving us crazy with your unconventional choices. She understood something that took me years to figure out, that learning doesn't always happen in traditional ways or on traditional timelines. Is that why you went back to school? To get the associate's degree? Partly. I wanted to experience the community college system firsthand, understand how it serves students who don't fit the traditional university model. But also, I smiled. I wanted to give you the chance to see me graduate from something. His eyes filled with tears. You did this for us? I did this for me. But I knew it would mean something to you and Mom to see me in a cap and gown, walking across a stage, receiving a diploma. Even though you already own 3 universities. Even though I already own 3 universities. We walked back toward the graduation crowd, where Mom and Lauren were waiting with questions written all over their faces. So what happens now? Lauren asked as we approached. Now we go to dinner and celebrate my graduation. Tomorrow I'll continue working on the integration plans for the university donations. Monday we'll have press conferences at Harvard, Stanford, and MIT to announce the partnerships. And after that? After that, I'll keep building. There are still millions of students around the world who don't have access to quality education. That's a problem worth spending a lifetime solving. Mom hugged me tightly. I can't believe our daughter is going to change the world. I'm going to try. No, Dad said, putting his arm around both of us. You're already changing it. You've been changing it for years. We just didn't know we were watching it happen. As we walked toward the parking lot, Lauren was still scrolling through articles about educational philanthropy and mysterious donors. There's something else, she said suddenly. The article mentions that you're only 28 years old. It says you're the youngest person in history to make donations of this magnitude to higher education. That's probably accurate. And it says you started your first business at 16, right after dropping out of high school. Also accurate. So when Dad was worried about you wasting your potential, I was actually maximizing it. Just not in ways that looked conventional from the outside. Dad stopped walking. 16 years old. You were 16 when you started building all this. I was 16 when I realized that traditional education wasn't going to give me what I needed to accomplish my goals. So I created my own education. By dropping out of high school. By starting businesses, failing, learning from the failures, and trying again. By reading everything I could about entrepreneurship, technology, and education. by working in different industries to understand how the world actually works. And we spent 12 years worrying that you'd thrown your life away. You spent 12 years being loving, supportive parents who wanted the best for their daughter, even when you didn't understand her choices. As we reached our cars, my phone buzzed with a text message. My assistant, confirming that all 17 university partnerships had received final board approval. $2 billion in educational donations, officially approved and ready for Monday's coordinated announcement. One more thing, I said as Dad fumbled with his car keys. The press conference on Monday. I'd like you and Mom to be there. Why? Because none of this would have been possible without the values you taught me. The importance of education, the willingness to work hard for your goals, the responsibility to help others when you've been blessed with success. But we didn't support your choices. We didn't believe in what you were doing. You didn't have to believe in my specific choices to give me the foundation I needed to make those choices successfully. You taught me integrity, persistence, and compassion. Everything else was just application. Dad looked at the community college campus one more time, then at me standing there in my graduation gown, then at the phone that had been ringing all afternoon with calls from Harvard, Stanford, and MIT. I still can't quite believe it, he said. What part? That my daughter who just graduated from community college is about to become the most important philanthropist in higher education. Former dropout, I corrected with a smile. Community college graduate. And future catalyst for educational revolution. Future? Dad, the donations are just the beginning. Wait until you see what we're going to build with them. As I drove home that evening, to my basement apartment in the house where I'd grown up, I thought about the look on Dad's face when he'd finally understood what I'd been building all these years. Tomorrow, the world would learn that a 28-year-old community college graduate had just pledged $2 billion to revolutionize higher education. The media would want to know how someone so young had accumulated so much wealth and why she'd chosen to give so much of it away. But tonight I was just Alex, the high school dropout who'd surprised her family by turning out differently than anyone had expected. The basement dweller who'd quietly changed the world while everyone thought she was wasting her potential. The community college graduate who'd just proven that success looks different for everyone, and sometimes the most unconventional paths lead to the most extraordinary destinations. Monday would bring press conferences, media attention, and public recognition. Tonight, I had something better. A family who finally understood that sometimes the daughter who worries you the most is the one who's been making you proud all along.